The rope had been fraying for weeks. Everyone at Marchhaven Manor knew it. The head groom had said so twice. The under-butler had mentioned it once. The old well behind the kitchen garden groaned every time the bucket went down, and the sound of it was the sound of something that would not last much longer. But no one wanted to spend the coin to fix it, and no one wanted to be the one who told the master that the coin needed to be spent, and so the rope stayed as it was, thin in places and thick in others, and the bucket kept going down, and the water kept coming up, and the mornings kept passing the way mornings do when a thing is about to break. Vivienne Ashcombe stood by the kitchen door and watched the rope shiver in the wind. She had come down early, before the fires were lit, before the cook had scolded the scullery girl, before the sun had done more than nudge the edge of the sky. She liked this hour. She was a governess in a house that did not love her, and the hour before the house woke was the only hour that felt like her own. The stone under her shoes was cold. The air smelled of wet moss and old smoke from a fire that had gone out. Somewhere far off a rook called once, and then was quiet. She had come out to fetch water for the nursery basin. The scullery girl was ill this week, and Vivienne did not mind the small work. She had grown up in a country parsonage, and she knew how to draw water, and she liked the feel of the handle in her hand. And she liked the smell of the well in the morning, which was a smell of stone and cold iron, and something green that grew in the dark under the world. She set the bucket on the low stone lip. She fixed the hook. She began to turn the handle. The rope creaked. She had heard it creak 100 times. She thought nothing of it. She did not know that a man had ridden into the yard an hour before dawn. She did not know that the man had worn a plain brown coat and a hat pulled low, and had told the stable lad that he was a wool factor come to see about the shearing. She did not know that he had stabled his own horse, and had walked once around the outbuildings on foot, and had come to a stop near the corner of the kitchen wall, where the whetstone hid him from the door, and where he could see the well and could see her. The Duke of Renmere had been lied to before. That was the plain fact of it, and he carried it like a splinter he could not dig out. He had come to look at Marchhaven Manor because a match had been suggested to him, and because the young lady of the house, Miss Petra Marchhaven, was said to be gentle and clever and fond of horses, and because he had believed such things before, and had learned what such things could mean when the door was closed and the settlement signed. So he had come early, and he had come plain, and he had told no one who he was. He had wanted to see the house before it saw him. He had not expected to see a young woman at the well. He had not expected the light to be the colour it was, thin and pale and a little pink at the edges, and he had not expected the way she stood, easy at the handle, as though the work belonged to her hands. He watched her turn the crank. He watched her lean her weight into it. He watched the rope go tight and then slack and then tight again, and he heard the sound of it, and something in the back of his mind, some old habit of a man who had grown up around horses and rigging and hemp, told him the rope was going to fail. He opened his mouth to call out. He did not have time. The rope snapped with a sound like a small dry bone breaking. The bucket dropped. Vivienne was pulled forward by the sudden weight, and her hip struck the stone lip of the well, and her feet skidded on the wet flag, and for one long moment she was neither in the yard nor in the well but somewhere between, her hands scraping at the mossy stone, her breath knocked flat out of her chest. She grabbed. Her fingers caught the frayed end of what was left of the rope, the short, thick part still fixed to the crank above. It burned her palm. She held on anyway. Her feet swung free. She heard herself make a sound. It was not a scream. It was smaller than that, a sharp, thin sound of surprise, and after it there was only her own breath, very loud, and the drip of water somewhere far below her, and the smell of old stone and cold moss, and the black of the well opening up under her boots like a mouth. The Duke moved before he thought. He crossed the yard in 3 long strides. His coat, the plain brown one, caught on the corner of a barrel, and he did not slow. He came to the lip of the well, and he saw her, hanging by one bloodied hand from a foot of rope, her face turned up to him with an expression that was not fear, but a hard, held stillness, as though she had decided fear would not help her and had put it away. "Give me your other hand," he said. His voice was low. He did not shout. Shouting was for men who were afraid of not being heard. She looked at him. She did not know him. She saw a man in a rough coat with a face that was not kind and was not cruel, but was only very awake. She lifted her other hand. He caught her wrist. His grip was hard. She felt the bones of his fingers through her sleeve. "Now the other," he said. "Let go the rope." "I have you." She let go the rope. For one bright, terrible second she was held only by his one hand around her wrist, and she saw his shoulder pull, and she saw the tendons in his neck stand out, and she felt herself lifted, not gently, up over the lip of the stone, and set down on the wet flag as though she weighed nothing at all. She sat where he put her. Her skirt was soaked at the hem. Her palm was bleeding where the rope had taken skin. She pressed her good hand flat against the stone, because the stone was solid, and she needed something solid. "You are hurt," he said. He had gone down on one knee beside her. He did not touch her again. He looked at her hand as though it were a problem to be solved. "It is only the palm," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "It will mend." "The rope was frayed," he said. "Yes," she said. "It was. Someone told the master, I suppose. 2 of them did." He looked at her then, straight, and she saw something in his face that she did not have a name for. It was not pity. It was closer to anger, but the anger was not at her. "Sit still," he said. He stood up. He walked to the horse trough at the far end of the yard, and he dipped his handkerchief in the cold water, and he came back, and he knelt again, and he held the handkerchief out to her. "For the hand," he said. "Wrap it. It will keep the dirt out until you can dress it proper." She took the handkerchief. It was fine linen. The stitching in the corner was too neat for a wool factor. She noticed and did not say. She wound it around her palm. He watched her do it. "You have done that before," he said. "I have a small brother," she said. "He falls out of trees." He almost smiled. She saw the corner of his mouth move and then be still again, as though a smile were a thing he did not quite allow himself. He stood. "Can you stand?" Yes, she stood. Her hip hurt where it had struck the stone. She did not let it show on her face. He watched her not let it show, and he nodded once, as though something had been confirmed. "Who are you?" she asked. "A wool factor," he said. "Come to see about the shearing. My name is Kestrel." It was not his name. It was the name of a bird his father had liked. He gave it because he had needed to give something, and because he did not want to lie more than he had to. She looked at him a beat too long. She did not believe him. She did not challenge him either. She had learned in her 3 years as a governess that a woman who challenged a stranger's word in an empty yard was a woman with more courage than sense. "Mr. Kestrel," she said. "Thank you for the handkerchief." "You may keep it," he said. "It is ruined for anything else." "I will wash it," she said, "and return it." "As you like." She picked up the empty bucket. The broken end of the rope hung sadly from its handle. She looked at it a moment, and then she looked at the crank on the well, where the other broken end swung in the little wind. She looked at the stone lip where her hip had struck. She was the only one who had climbed out. There had been no one else to lift her, and the rope had not held, and if he had not been there, she stopped the thought. She did not let herself finish it. "I must go in," she said. "The children will be waking." "You are the governess." "Yes, Miss Marchavens." "Miss Marchaven has no need of a governess. She is 19. I teach her younger sisters, Cecily and Marin." "Ah," he said. She waited for him to say something else. He did not. She curtsied, small and correct, and she turned and walked back to the kitchen door, and she did not look behind her, though every step of her felt him watching. Her palm throbbed under the linen. Her hip ached. Her breath was still not quite her own. Inside the kitchen the cook was banging a pan, and the scullery girl, sick or not, had crawled out to do her work, and the smell of hot dripping and yesterday's bread had filled the low room. Vivienne set the empty bucket on the floor. The cook looked at it. "Where is the water?" The rope broke. The cook stared at her, then at the bucket, then at the bloodied linen wrapped around Vivienne's hand. "Lord have mercy," said the cook quietly. "You fell in?" "Nearly. How did you come out?" Vivienne opened her mouth and then closed it. She thought about a man in a plain brown coat with fine linen in his pocket. She thought about the way he had lifted her out with one hand, as if she were nothing at all. She thought about the name that was not his name. "I climbed," she said. "There was a man in the yard. He held the rope while I climbed. It was not the truth. It was not quite a lie either." She did not know why she did not want to say more. Perhaps she felt that a stranger who gave a false name deserved his own quiet. Perhaps she felt that a debt of one's life was a thing to be paid slowly and by oneself, and not to be talked about over the morning bread. The cook crossed herself. "You are the only one who's ever come out of that well. Old Tompkins fell in 10 years back, and they pulled him out cold. The rope was rotten then too." "The rope is fixed now," said Vivienne. "It is not fixed. It is broken. It will be fixed by nightfall. Not by this house it won't." Vivienne washed her hand at the pump in the scullery. She unwound the fine linen and rinsed the blood out of it and hung it to dry on the low peg by the window. She wound a strip of clean rag around her palm and tied it with her teeth. Then she went upstairs to wake the children. Cecily was 6. Maren was 8. They loved her with a fierce, uncomplicated love that Vivienne sometimes thought was the only warm thing in the whole of Marchhaven Manor. They were awake already, sitting up in the same narrow bed, their heads bent over a small wooden horse that Maren had made from a clothespin and a bit of string. "You are late," said Maren, without looking up. "I am not late. You are early." The horse would not sleep. Then the horse must have tea. She dressed them. She brushed their hair. She put fresh water in their basin from the ewer that had been filled the day before, since the well was, as she now knew, out of use. She did not tell them about the rope. She did not tell them about the man. She only kissed the tops of their heads and led them down to the schoolroom, where the fire had been laid but not lit, and she lit it herself with a taper from the hall. By the time she came down to the breakfast room, the household was fully awake. Miss Petra Marchhaven was already at the table, in a sprigged morning dress, her hair up in a way that had taken her maid an hour. Mrs. Marchhaven, her mother, was pouring tea. Mrs. Marchhaven, her father, was reading a letter with his brows pulled together. And standing by the sideboard, dressed now in a dark green coat that fit him too well to have been made by any country tailor, was the man from the well. He looked up when she came in. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply looked at her, and she saw at once that he had known, from the moment she stepped through the door, that she was coming. He had been waiting. "Ah," said Mr. Marchhaven, folding his letter. "Miss Ashcombe, come in, come in. Your Grace, this is our governess, Miss Ashcombe. Miss Ashcombe, allow me the honour of presenting His Grace the Duke of Renmere." She did not drop the plate she was carrying. She did not gasp. She stood very still, and she made her curtsy and she said, "Your Grace," in a voice that was perfectly correct. Mrs. Marchhaven had gone a pale, tight colour, as though someone had asked her a question in a language she did not know. Miss Petra Marchhaven had gone pink, which suited her, and had lowered her lashes, which she had been practising for a week. "Miss Ashcombe," said the Duke of Renmere, and his voice was the voice from the yard. "I hope your morning has been well." "Very well, Your Grace." "No accidents?" He said it lightly, but his eyes did not leave her. "None to speak of," she said. "I am glad to hear it." Miss Marchhaven, who had missed all of this because he had already turned to his coffee, said cheerfully, "His Grace arrived earlier than we expected. We had thought Thursday. It seems we had the day quite wrong." "I begged pardon for the surprise," said the Duke. "Business took me through this country sooner than I had planned. I hope I have not put the household out." "Not at all, not at all," said Mrs. Marchhaven, in the voice of a woman who has been put out very much indeed. Vivienne set down the plate she was carrying. She put butter on Cecily's toast, because Cecily could not manage the butter knife yet. She did not look at the Duke. She could feel him not looking at her either, which was worse, because it was a not looking that had weight, that took work. Petra Marchhaven was speaking. She was telling the Duke about her mare, and about the ride she had planned for that afternoon, and about the ruined abbey 3 miles off that was said to be very picturesque. The Duke listened politely. He said the ruin sounded well worth a visit. He said he was fond of a good ride. He said all the things a duke says at a breakfast table. Vivienne finished with the toast and led Cecily and Maren away to the schoolroom. She did not curtsy again on the way out. She did not think anyone noticed. She did not care if they had. The schoolroom was on the 2nd floor at the back of the house, over the kitchen garden, and the window looked down on the yard, and the yard held the well. Vivienne stood by the window while the girls did their sums and looked at the well, and thought about a man on one knee saying, "Sit still," in a voice that had never once in its life needed to be raised. He was the Duke of Renmere. He had come to look at Petra. He had lied about his name because he did not want to be seen for what he was until he had seen the house for what it was. She understood him now, more than he perhaps thought she did. She understood also that he had watched her at the well before the rope snapped, that he had been there for some minutes before she knew he was, and that he had spoken his false name to her not because he distrusted her, but because he distrusted the shape of the story he had walked into. Her palm ached. She looked down at the strip of rag she had tied. A spot of dark had bloomed through the cloth. "Miss Ashcombe," said Maren, "from the table, you are not listening." "I am listening." "Then what did I say?" "You said 7 times 8 is 56. "I did not. I said 7 times 8 is 54. "Then you were wrong. 56 is right." "How did you know if you were not listening?" "Because I know my times tables, and you do not yet." Maren scowled and went back to her sums. Cecily, 6 years old and full of a serious devotion, watched her older sister with the particular reverence of a small child for a larger one. Vivienne turned from the window and sat down at the table and began the lesson properly, and the well and the man and the ache in her palm went into the quiet back place where she kept things that could not yet be looked at. It was near noon when the knock came at the schoolroom door. Vivienne opened it. A footman stood there. "Miss Ashcombe." "Mrs. Marchhaven says please to come down to the small parlour." "Now?" "Yes, miss." She left the girls with a page of copywork. She smoothed her hair. She walked down the back stairs and along the corridor to the small parlour, and she stopped at the door because she could hear Mrs. Marchhaven's voice, and it was pitched low, which was worse than loud. "Cannot be permitted, Petra. It cannot. You will apologize, and you will say it was a misunderstanding, and we will hear no more of it." "I only asked her a question," said Petra's voice. "You did not ask. You accused." In front of him. He did not appear to mind. He did not appear to anything. That is his way. It is precisely why we cannot afford to have you doing whatever it is you were doing at breakfast. The door opened. Mrs. Marchhaven had opened it. She saw Vivienne. She did not have the grace to look embarrassed. "Ah, Miss Ashcombe." "Come in." Vivienne came in. Petra Marchhaven was by the window, in a state of very pretty tears. Mrs. Marchhaven closed the door and leaned her back against it. "Miss Ashcombe," she said, "I understand that this morning, before the household was risen, you were at the well." "Yes, ma'am." "And that you fell." "I nearly fell. I did not fall." "And that a gentleman was present." "Yes, that gentleman was His Grace the Duke of Renmere. I did not know it at the time." He introduced himself as Mr. Kestrel. "Miss Kestrel?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Marchhaven closed her eyes. She looked, for a moment, very tired. Then she opened them again, and the tiredness was gone, replaced by something harder. "Miss Ashcombe, you are aware that the Duke has come to Marchhaven with a view to my daughter. I am aware that a visit was expected. Do not be clever, Miss Ashcombe." "I did not intend to be, ma'am." "You will not speak to the Duke alone again." "I do not seek his company, ma'am." "You will not receive him in this house on any terms other than the most formal." "You will not walk in the garden while he is in it." "You will not sit at table with him if it can be avoided." "You will keep to the schoolroom." "Yes, ma'am." "Miss Ashcombe." "Yes, ma'am." "You are a servant in this house. A well-bred servant, I grant you, but a servant. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand my place, ma'am." "Your place is above stairs with the children and below stairs with the maids. It is not in the yard at dawn. It is not in conversation with visiting peers. It is not the subject of gossip in my morning room. Do we understand one another?" "Perfectly, ma'am." Petra Marchhaven, from the window, said, in a small voice that was not quite as sweet as it thought it was. "It is only that the Duke asked after her at breakfast, in front of Mama. And of course we had to explain." Vivienne turned her head slowly. She looked at Petra. She said nothing. "I do not blame you," said Petra. "It was not your fault. It was the rope." "Thank you, Miss Marchhaven. Only I do wish, next time, you might contrive to nearly fall into the well when there was not a Duke standing by. It is really very awkward." There it was. The one line. The one precise sentence that was more cruel than a slap, because it was said in a voice like honey, with a small smile, in front of the mother who did not correct it. Vivienne felt it land. She felt her face not move. She felt her hands, folded before her, remain still. She felt the small, careful place inside her, the place that had held her steady over the mouth of the well, hold her steady now. "I will endeavour," she said, "not to fall into any wells at all in future, Miss Marchhaven." She curtsied. She left the room. She closed the door with the quiet click that a well-bred servant closes a door. In the corridor she stood for a moment. She put her uninjured hand flat against the wallpaper. The wallpaper was cold. The corridor smelled faintly of beeswax and of the ashes from the fire in the small parlour. Somewhere very far off, a horse whinnied. She breathed in. She breathed out. She went back up to the schoolroom, and she did not tell the children anything, and she taught them Latin verbs for the rest of the morning. And her voice did not shake once. The Duke of Renmer did not appear at luncheon. He sent word that he was riding out to see the North Fields. Miss Marchhaven, delighted, went with him. They were gone until dusk. During those hours, Vivienne heard, through the ordinary channels by which a governess hears such things, the whisper of a housemaid in the corridor, a laundry girl's sigh in the yard, that Petra Marchhaven had spent the afternoon in her mother's dressing room, being lectured and being brushed and being fitted with a different gown for dinner. She heard also that a new rope had been ordered for the well, that the head groom had been sent into the village himself, that Mr. Marchhaven had promised, in the Duke's hearing, over breakfast, that the matter would be attended to at once. Nobody said the Duke had asked for this, but the head groom had never gone into the village himself for a bit of rope in 20 years of service, and nobody thought he had woken up that morning with a sudden fondness for the walk. At dinner Vivienne was not present. The governess did not dine with the family when there were guests. She ate a bowl of soup with the housekeeper in the housekeeper's small sitting room, and she read a page of a book by the fire, and she listened to the sound of the house above them, the muted rise and fall of company, and she thought of nothing in particular, and everything. At 9:30 she went up to the schoolroom to fetch a book she had forgotten. The corridor was dark. The house was quiet. She had a candle in her hand, and her hand shook only very slightly, because a day like this leaves the smallest tremble in one, and one cannot always help it. She had reached the top of the back stairs when a door opened at the far end of the passage, and a man stepped out. He was tall. He was in a dark coat. His face was in shadow. She stopped. She held the candle up. The light fell on the Duke of Renmer. He did not seem surprised to see her. He did not seem indeed to have expected anything else. "Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace, I hoped I might find you before I turned in. I am not to speak with you, Your Grace. I know. Then I must not." She curtsied. She turned to go. "Miss Ashcombe." She stopped. She did not turn around. "I am aware," he said, very quietly, "that Mrs. Marchhaven had a conversation with you today. I am aware of the shape of it, if not its exact words. I asked one question at breakfast, only one, about the accident I had witnessed. I did not know what would come of it. I am sorry for what came of it. Your Grace has nothing to apologize for. I have. I gave you a name that was not mine. I told you a lie in a yard where you had just nearly died. That is a debt I owe you before any other." She turned around then. Slowly, the candle wavered in her hand. "Why did you give me a false name?" "Because I have been lied to before. Because I have arrived at houses and been shown the daughter and the drawing room and the horse and the good side of the ledger, and I have found myself. 6 months later, in a marriage settled on a foundation that was not there. I came here without warning to see the house before it saw me. I did not know I would meet you first. You said all of this to a governess. I say it to a woman who very nearly died at a well while 2 men in this house left the rope unmended, and who did not, when I asked her, spend even one breath abusing the people who had done it. I say it to someone who came out of the well by her own hand and did not once, in the yard afterward, ask me to notice how brave she had been. I know very little of you, Miss Ashcombe. I know enough of you to give you the truth I have." She looked at him. She felt the candle flame flutter with her breath. She felt the corridor around them, and the sleeping house, and the quiet cold wall of the schoolroom door, and the very great impropriety of what they were doing, and she found that she did not, tonight, quite care. "I am angry with you," she said. "I know. You lied to me. I did. You let me thank you for a handkerchief when it was your handkerchief. It was my handkerchief. That was not the lie. You know what I mean. I do. You have made me an object of gossip in a house where I have worked hard to be no such thing. You have made Mrs. Marchhaven look at me as if I had stepped over a line I did not step over. You have made Miss Marchhaven say things to me that she would not have said yesterday. I did not ask you to notice me. I would have preferred that you had not." She had said more than she meant to say. It came out flatly, without heat. He absorbed it. He did not defend himself. He stood very still, one hand at his side, one hand on the frame of the door, and he let her say it. "I know," he said, when she was done. "You are right in all of it. I will not defend myself. I only ask that you allow me to correct what I can correct." "How?" "By behaving in this house, from tomorrow, exactly as I intend to behave. By making clear to Mr. and Mrs. Marchhaven what I saw at the well and what I did not see. By making clear also to the young lady of the house, in a way that requires no unkindness, that I did not come here to marry her. You did not? I did not know that until this morning. I know it now." The candle flame trembled again. Vivienne felt her heart do something she had not given it permission to do. She spoke carefully. "That is a great deal, Your Grace, to have decided on the strength of one morning. It is a great deal. But I did not decide it in one morning. I decided it in one moment, when the rope snapped, and you did not scream. When you took my hand and did not weep. When you said the rope had been mentioned twice, and did not name the men who ought to have mended it. When you accepted a stranger's handkerchief and gave him a false name back without correcting his. I did not give you a false name. You did not correct mine. That is a different kindness, and a rarer one." She did not know what to say. She had a 5th grade year of Latin to teach in the morning, and a bruised hip, and a blooded palm, and a duke standing 3 yards away from her in a corridor she should not have been in, and she had no words for any of it. "Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace, go to bed. I will not keep you longer. I only wanted you to know 2 things, that I am sorry for the name, and that I am sorrier still for the trouble I have caused you in this house. Both will be mended in the way I can mend them by tomorrow evening. Your Grace, sleep well, Miss Ashcombe." He inclined his head to her, gravely. He went back through the door he had come out of. She stood alone in the corridor with her candle and the tremble in her hand, and the smell of the beeswax, and the dark shape of the schoolroom door. And after a moment she turned, and went slowly up the stairs to her own small room under the eaves. And she lay in her bed for a long time, listening to the wind in the chimney, and to the small ordinary creaks of a house that did not know that anything at all had changed in it. The next morning at Marchhaven began as most mornings did, but by 10 it had begun to be different, and by noon it was different in a way that could not be undone. At 10:30 the Duke of Renmire requested a private audience with Mr. Marchhaven in the library. Nobody knew what was said. But the head groom, who happened to be passing the library window on his way from the stables to the new rope which he was, at that hour, personally fixing to the well, later swore under his breath at supper that he had heard, through the open casement, the word negligence and the word gross, and the phrase "a young woman under your roof," in a voice that had not been raised, but had somehow filled the whole of the library and gone out into the yard with it. At 11 Mrs. Marchhaven was summoned to the library. She was there for a quarter of an hour. When she came out, she was pale in a new way, and she went upstairs to her dressing-room and shut the door and did not come down for luncheon. At 11:30, Miss Petra Marchhaven was invited to walk in the garden with the Duke of Renmire. They walked for exactly 18 minutes. Nobody knew what was said. But when Petra came back into the house she was crying, not the pretty little tears of the parlour, but a plain, embarrassed, wet-faced crying, and she went straight up to her own room. And she did not come out for the rest of the day. At noon a footman brought Vivienne, in the schoolroom, a note. It was folded, sealed, and addressed in a firm hand to Miss Ashcombe. She opened it. It read, "If you can be spared from the schoolroom at 3 o'clock, I would be grateful for the honour of a walk with you. Mrs. Marchhaven is aware of the request and does not object." Renmire, she read it twice. She folded it, She put it in her sleeve. She taught Latin for the next 3 hours, and she did not, this time, look out of the window at the well once. At 3 o'clock she went down to the hall in her plainest walking dress and her plainest bonnet. The Duke was waiting at the door. He was in the dark green coat. He offered her his arm. She looked at his arm as though it were a strange piece of furniture. Then she put her hand on it, and they went out. They walked to the ruined abbey. It was 3 miles off, along a lane that ran between 2 hedges, and the hedges were full of the small red hips of the wild rose, and the air was full of the smell of turned earth from a field where a plough had gone by that morning. And a magpie flew across the lane in front of them and landed on a post and looked at them with a bright hard eye and flew off again. They did not speak for the first mile. Vivienne did not know how to begin. The Duke did not seem in any hurry to make her begin. "Your Grace," she said at last. "Yes, I do not know what you said in the library. I said that a rope had been allowed to fray for 3 weeks in a household where every servant had reported it, and that a young woman in your care had come near her death because of it, and that I did not consider the matter closed by the fixing of the rope. You had no right to say that. I had every right. You were the guest of that house for as long as I was in it. And I do not sit at a table where a governess has been sent up to her schoolroom without a doctor after nearly falling into a well. I did not need a doctor. You needed one. You were denied one. I did not require one for you today either. I only required that the household be reminded that your hand had been bleeding when you served their breakfast." She walked on. Her hand, wrapped now in a fresh strip of clean linen, ached only faintly. She thought about the breakfast room, and the toast, and Cecily's butter, and she felt her cheeks go warm. "Your Grace, I am the governess. I know. That is not a station in which one is defended by dukes. I have not defended you. I have observed a state of affairs, and I have named it. You did the defending. You did it in the yard, with a handkerchief around your palm, and you did it in the parlour when you were told that you had inconvenienced Miss Marchevin by not falling more discreetly. How do you know she said that? Because I asked her. You asked her. I asked her, in the garden this morning, what she had said to you yesterday. I asked her because it was the only question I had the right to ask her, and because her answer would tell me whether I owed her the courtesy of an offer or the courtesy of a plain refusal. She told me, word for word. She was proud of it. She thought it was clever. Vivienne did not speak for some yards. She looked at the hedges. And what did you do? I told her that she was young, and that I hoped in time she would come to see that a well-turned cruelty is not the same thing as wit. I told her I would not be making an offer. I told her also that I would speak to her father, and to her mother, and would make plain that no fault of the house had drawn my refusal, so that no talk should go abroad against them from my quarter. I owe them that. They have been polite hosts. They are not bad people. They only forgot, for a little while, that the world does not divide neatly into people who matter and people who do not. They came round a turn in the lane, and the abbey came into view. It was a low, broken thing, half covered in ivy, a single tall arch still standing, roofless, and a low wall around a square of grass that had once been a nave. Vivienne had walked past it many times. She had never stopped. They stopped now. He handed her over a broken stile. She sat down on the low wall. He stood beside her, one boot on the wall, one on the grass. Your Grace, she said. Yes, why did you ask me to walk with you? Because I promised you last night that I would mend what I could. I have mended what I could within the house. What is left is between you and me. I could not mend it in a corridor. There is nothing to mend between us. There is a debt. You said so yourself, without saying so. I lied to you at a well. I owe you a truth in a place where you can stand up and walk away if it displeases you. And what is the truth? He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved in the ivy on the arch above them. Somewhere a lamb bleated, and its mother answered. The truth, he said, is that I came into this country 3 days ago with the intention of proposing marriage to a young woman I had never met. I came in a disguise because I did not trust her family. I did not trust her. I did not trust myself. And in the yard yesterday morning I saw a young woman I had also never met turn a well handle in the cold, and I saw a rope snap, and I saw her come out of it by her own strength and my one hand, and I saw her wrap a bit of linen around a bloodied palm without complaint, and I heard her say she had a small brother who fell out of trees, and I understood. In a way I have not understood anything in some years, that I had been looking in the wrong direction for the wrong thing. She did not move. That is not, she said, an appropriate thing to say to a governess. I know. That is not, she said, an appropriate thing to say to any woman on the second day of acquaintance. I know. You do not know me. I know that. I am not proposing anything, Miss Ashcombe. I am telling you a truth, because I promised one. That is all. I am going home to Renmere tomorrow. I have engagements in the north for the autumn. I do not intend to press upon you a single thing you did not ask for. But I did not want to leave this country without your knowing why I refused Miss Marchhaven. It was not a refusal of her. It was a decision that I am not going to be married in the manner in which I was going to be married. I would rather be alone another 20 years than settle for the shape of a life I do not believe in. Vivienne looked at her hands, folded in her lap. She felt the linen against her palm. Your Grace. Yes, you have said a great deal. I would like to say only one thing. Please, you are a stranger to me. You have been kind and you have been dishonest, and you have been kind again. I have thanked you and I have been angry with you. I am not, this afternoon, in a condition to know which of these things is truer than the others. I am a governess in a country manor. I have 2 small girls whom I love, and I have a small brother in a parsonage in Somerset. And I have no fortune and no expectation of one. I do not know why you are telling me any of this. I know that when you go tomorrow, my life will go on as it was before you came. That is what I know. That is enough for you to know. Is it? For today it is. She looked up at him then. He was not smiling. He was watching her with the same careful, awake look he had worn at the well. And she found that she trusted the look, even if she did not, yet trust anything else about him. Your Grace, she said. Yes, when you go tomorrow, will you write to me? She surprised herself. She had not planned to say it. She had not, until she said it, known that she wanted to say it. He did not look surprised. He looked, for a moment, as though he had been waiting for her to say it, and had not been willing to say it first. Yes, he said. If you will allow it, I will write. You will not write daily. No, you will not write things a governess cannot be seen to receive. No, you will write as a friend, and I will answer as one. And if, in a year, we are still writing, we will consider then what more we know of one another. And if, in a year, we have stopped, we will know that too, and no harm will have been done. That is a very careful bargain. I am a careful woman. I have noticed. She looked at the arch above them, and at the sky through the arch, and at the way the ivy moved in the small wind. She felt, all at once, that she was doing a thing she would remember. She let herself feel it. Then she gathered herself, and she stood up, and she brushed the dust of the wall from her skirt, and she looked at him plainly. Your Grace, I should like to walk back now. Of course. They walked back the 3 miles to Marchhaven. They spoke of small things, of his boyhood in a house by the sea, of her father's parish, of a book she had been reading, of a mare of his that had a habit of eating apples out of pockets. When they came in sight of the manor, they had drawn a little apart on the lane, and by the time they reached the drive her hand was no longer on his arm, and no one at the manor could have said with certainty that anything at all had passed between them. At dinner that night, the Duke was correctly and unfailingly courteous to Mr. Marchhaven. He was correctly and unfailingly courteous to Mrs. Marchhaven. He was correctly and unfailingly courteous to Miss Petra Marchhaven, who did not raise her eyes from her plate. He did not once look toward the schoolroom, or the well, or the corridor where the back stairs came down. He left the next morning at 9, with a small polite bow to the family gathered on the steps. And he rode out down the drive without turning his head, and the yard, when he had gone, seemed a plainer place than it had been the day before. The letters began 10 days later. The first was short. It was addressed to Miss Ashcombe, Marchhaven Manor, and it inquired politely as to her hand, and told her a small story of a horse who had bitten a groom, and closed with the words, I remain your friend, W. She read it 3 times and answered it in an afternoon. She wrote about the 2 children, and about a book, and about a hedge full of red hips. She signed it, your friend, V. Ashcombe. The letters ran through the autumn. They ran through the winter. He wrote of ice on a lake and of a tenant's new child. She wrote of Cecily's first attempt at Greek, and of a starling that had come down the chimney and had had to be caught in a shawl. They did not write of feelings. They wrote of days. In their writing of days, everything else was there, but neither of them named it, and both of them knew. In the spring, Mrs. Marchhaven let Vivienne go. It was done politely. It was done with a good character in writing and a small purse of coins. Vivienne understood. She had known since Christmas that the winter would be her last at Marchhaven. Petra had been sent to an aunt in Bath. The house had grown smaller and colder without her. Mrs. Marchhaven no longer met Vivienne's eye. It was not spite. It was, at last, only a house that could not hold the shape of what had happened in it. Vivienne went home to Somerset, to her father's parsonage, to her small brother who no longer fell out of trees so often, and to a garden that ran down to a stream. She wrote to the Duke from the parsonage. He wrote back from Renmer. In August he asked, very simply, in a letter of 2 paragraphs, whether he might come to Somerset for a week to see her father. Her father was a mild, thoughtful man with white hair and ink-stained fingers. He received the Duke in his study for one afternoon, and Vivienne did not know what was said in that room. But her father came out of it with a small, quiet smile that she had not seen on his face for years, and he said, "He is a good man, my dear. I think you already know that." The Duke stayed at the inn in the village for 4 days. He walked with Vivienne in the garden. He walked with her along the stream. He sat with her in the parsonage parlour, with her father in a chair by the fire, and her brother reading a book at the table. On the 4th day, in the small orchard at the back of the parsonage, with the apples green on the branches and the smell of grass in the air and the sound of bees somewhere over the wall, he asked her, plainly and without kneeling, whether she would consider marrying him. He said he understood if she needed more time. He said he had no expectation. He said he had come this far because a promise made at an abbey a year ago had, on his side, come to mean what it meant, and he wanted her to have the chance to say what it meant on hers. She said yes. She said it as plainly as he had asked. She said it in a voice that did not shake, and afterward he took her hand, the palm that had been cut on a rope a year before, and he lifted it, and he pressed his mouth to the small pale scar there, not to her lips, not to her cheek, but to the mark of the day at the well, which was, both of them knew, where the whole thing had begun. They were married in the parsonage in October. It was a small wedding. Her father read the service. Her brother stood beside her. Cecily and Maren, whom Vivienne had asked for in the settlement so that they might visit her whenever they wished, sat on a bench with a small posy each, kicking their heels. There were no dukes present, but the one who was marrying her. There were no fine gowns. Mrs. Marchhaven had not been invited. Miss Petra Marchhaven had not been invited. The Duke had thought briefly about whether that was cruel, and had decided that it was not, and had left it there. After the wedding they went to Renmere. It was a great house. It had many rooms. It had a well in the yard behind the stables, with a strong rope that had been replaced only that spring, and Vivienne, on the first morning of her life at Renmere, went out early, in the hour before the fires were lit, and stood by the well and looked at the rope, and felt the cold stone under her shoes, and felt the smell of stone and cold iron and moss come up out of the mouth of it, and she thought about a young woman a year and a half ago, who had come out of another well by her own hand. And she thought that if that young woman had known what waited for her, she would not have believed it. She did not go back inside at once. She stood for a long time. She listened to the small sounds of a great house waking. She heard, at last, a familiar step on the stone behind her, heavy, not hurried, and she did not turn around, because she knew who it was. And because the not turning was itself a small pleasure now that she could afford. "You are up early," he said. "I like the hour, I know." He came and stood beside her. He looked down into the well. "It is a good well," he said. "The water is very cold. Is the rope good?" "Yes, it was mended in April. It will not break." "Nothing," she said, "is truly certain to never break." "No," he said. "But some things are mended by hands you can trust, and that is as much as one can ask." She looked at him then. He was looking down into the dark of the well, and his profile was quiet, and the small line at the corner of his mouth was the closest thing to a smile she had ever seen him wear in the morning, and she found that she was content, in a plain and unshowy way. To stand there beside him in the cold, and to have all the sounds of the great house waking behind her, and to have her palm, with its small pale scar, resting on the stone lip of the well where nothing at all was going to break today. She had been the only one who had climbed out of that other well, 1.5 years and a lifetime ago, and she thought, standing here now, that perhaps the climb had never really ended, perhaps it had only gone on, in quieter forms, hand over hand, day after day, until it had brought her up out of the dark and into a morning like this, with the smell of cold stone in her nose and a good man beside her, and the whole of an ordinary day waiting to begin. And she thought, too, that whatever came next, she would keep climbing. Because that was what she had always done, and because she had at last found the sort of life that was worth the climb.